So here you can see that I've got my line drawn, and you can see that I've got the holes drilled for the hinge. The spacing for the holes, the instructions say that you should have roughly 1.5 inches of spacing. What I decided to do was basically to have a good edge distance. I came in from the edge of each end 1/2 inch and 1/2 inch, and then between those two I evenly spaced the rest of the holes. So these are roughly 1 inch and 5/8 a piece. They're not exact. I ended up doing 1 and 5/8 for the first few holes, and then 1 and 5/8 for these few holes, and then the hole in the middle is like 1.5 inches. So I'm fine with that. So I got those laid out and I have them drilled. Now all I have to do is go back to my hinge, and I will put this back into the leg, and then I will position it in the leg and clamp it so that the lines line up with one another. Of course, I'll do that on both ends. Line up the lines and then clamp them together. And then I will also verify that the line that I had drawn down the center of the hinge falls within these holes. So after I've got the ends of the hinge lined up and clamped, I want to be able to see that line on the hinge through these holes. Another thing to consider is this. The hinge is longer. When you cut the hinge, you cut it longer than the leg itself. So you've got room here to decide where exactly to position the hinge. Just sort of kind of keep that in mind. You may want to try to, because ultimately once the hinge is riveted in place, you're going to cut the end off even with the edge of the leg. So you want to decide where you want to cut that hinge. Do you want to cut it right where two knuckles come together? Do you want to try to cut it down the center of a knuckle? And you can kind of lay that in there and kind of decide before you start drilling it how you want it laid out when you look at this side and also this other side. Just something to think about. So position the hinge where you want it, line it up with the line and clamp it in place, and then you can come back and verify you can see the line in the holes, and then you can start match drilling. Now you guys know me at this point, right? I hardly ever match drill anything outright. So what I do is I get my hinge where I want it and I clamp it, and I'll clamp the other side. I'll make a mark on this hole, and I'll make a mark on that hole. I'll pull the hinge out, and then I'll drill the hinge in those two locations. Then I'll put the hinge back in place, and I'll put a cleco through those two holes. And then I'll come into like the center point, mark it, pull the hinge out, drill it, come back, cleco, 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 and then I'll pick one in between the two, mark it, pick one in between, mark it, pull the hinge out, drill those two, put it all back together, and cleco it. So now I've got a cleco like every third or fourth hole. Make sure I can still see my line underneath. And then whatever holes are left, at that point, I'll just mark them. Pull the hinge out yet again, drill all the remaining holes deeper. That's what I plan on doing with this one as well. So that just makes sure that everything stays nice and aligned, because you do it a piece at a time, a little bit at a time, and just keep checking the holes with the lines to make sure that nothing is starting to walk. After I get it anchored on the ends and a couple more in the middle, now I know that the hinge is not going to walk, and I can do the other ones. So just personal preference. All right, let me get this hinge drilled, and I'll talk to you guys later. Here is the gear leg and the hinge now ready to be riveted. A couple of things before I get to that point. Of course, you want to, after you have your spacing laid out. Of course, you want to drill the leg, and then, like I had talked about, then I will position the hinge inside, line up my reference line on the hinge with the reference line on the leg, clamp it in place, and then I'll drill the hole. I'll mark the hole through the leg onto the hinge on both ends, pull the hinge out, drill the hole, put the hinge back in, cleco those two holes, and then mark a hole in the middle, pull the hinge out, drill it, put the hinge back in, cleco those holes. And I keep doing that basically until I have like every other hole clecoed. Then I can go ahead and mark the other ones. I just want to make sure I have enough clecos in the hinge to hold it securely so I can mark it. The other thing is, while you're doing that, you want to look through these holes and make sure that you can see your reference line on the hinge. You don't want the hinge to start walking away from these holes. You want to make sure that you can see the line underneath. Doing them a little bit at a time, like I had just said, gives you the opportunity, if you see one starting to wander, you can kind of pull it into place and then mark it and then drill it. Of course, you can see I've taken the tape off. We'll go back to that one more time here in a second, but you have to have the tape off to do the riveting. Once you have your lines drawn on the leg, it's not all that critical while you're drilling these holes to have the tape in place, because everything is already marked. But I left the tape in place, and I did all my drilling, I did all of my countersinking, and then I took the tape off. Everything is cleaned really well. I wash the leg under running water to get all of the dust and debris out of it. It's nice and dry. You can see I've cleaned the hinge. I've taken the reference line is off. I just clean everything really well. Make sure there's no debris inside the individual knuckles. And then you can see that the length has been trimmed. The hinge ends have been trimmed to length, and they now have the correct angle on them. So here's what I was talking about in an earlier video about when you're initially fitting the hinge. How does this go? This goes this way. When you're initially fitting the hinge, right before you do your drilling and you're trying to figure out how to position it, you can see how this knuckle has been cut. Now, it would have been kind of a waste if there was only like a 1/16 of this knuckle left, right? If I would have cut all of this knuckle back and there was just a little sliver of it left, that's kind of a waste. So you want to make sure you position this so that you've got some meat still left. So I've got about a half a knuckle here, and I've got a full knuckle here, and I got good edge distance on both ends. So now at this point, it's just a matter of riveting. Now, I use a squeezer. I use my pneumatic squeezer. I use a 3-inch yoke because when you do the riveting, of course, you've got to spread this. You got to spread the fairing open to get your rivet gun up in there, or your squeezer up in there. And to prevent from having, you don't want to separate this more than you need to. So the 3-inch is a good choice because it's relatively thin, and whatever configuration you come up with for your dies, put the smallest die on this leg of the yoke. That way this overall dimension with your die stack up is always nice and thin. If your bigger die, your taller die, and any washer stack up should go on this side, and this will be on the outside of the fairing. You want to try to keep this overall dimension nice and thin so you don't have to overstress the fairing to get it in there. So I believe that's it. So now it's just a matter of reinstalling the hinge, fill it with clecos, and then rivet. The instructions specifically state not to fully rivet. Don't do a full what do I want to say? Don't fully compress the rivet. Don't fully squeeze it because you will crack the fiberglass. So with my setup here, I just went a thin washer short. I have a cheat sheet that I've been keeping track of ever since I started the build, where I have my different die stack ups written down for different rivets and different material using different yokes. So when I do this size rivet, I usually use a specific stack up, and I use that same stack up but minus a thin washer. So I'm like a thin washer shy of a full squeeze, and that worked really well on this leg. So I'm going to do the exact same thing. So I'm going to install the hinge, rivet it, and then we're going to go back and redo the tape, and then we'll start on the other side.